evening, good afternoon, or good morning, jazz people out there in internet land. My name is Jan. I'm with you once again, this time for the concluding episode on our what was our ongoing survey of the legendary Benny Goodman's recorded output out there. Now, we didn't look at everything, of course. I didn't play everything. It would be impossible to play extracts from everything he recorded. That would take months on end. But here he is in 1982. So as you can see, Benny could still wail on that clarinet just like in the old days. Now, at the time of this recording, he was around 72 years old. This is in 1982. It's a recorded performance at the North Sea Jazz Festival, featuring the great Scott Hamilton on saxophone and tenor saxophone, and some other great jazz musicians that were playing with him at the time near the end of his career. Scott was one that played off and on, pretty often, I guess, with Mr. Goodman near the end of the career. This whole concert was recorded for television broadcast, and it's available for free on YouTube. So if you search Benny Goodman 1982 North Sea Jazz Festival, you will find this excellent concert by Benny and his septet, which he was touring with at the time. So near the end of his career, starting mostly in the 70s, I guess, but in the 60s too, he was more focused on the small group touring, occasionally reforming a big band and going around touring with a big band. But it was mostly the small group. Much more often he was in a small group setting. Now we're nearing the end of his career. This is the 80s. We're into the 80s, and he's going to pass away in 1986, I believe in, what was it, June or August of 1986. I don't remember exactly when. But he's going to pass away of a heart attack. And he was still very active till the end, because just a couple of days before he passed away, he was talking to a friend about going to play, I think it was a Mozart concerto, clarinet concerto concert somewhere in the United States. So he was still very much active on both fronts, maybe perhaps a little bit more on the classical front in his last years, in his very last years, I'm not sure. But of course he was much more well known for the jazz side of his recordings, and this is, of course, was his main career was in the jazz realm, the jazz domain, and that's why we focused mostly, we focused uniquely on his jazz career. So, because that's what he'll be remembered for, of course. Since I last spoke with you guys, or spoke to you guys, because I'm not speaking with you, I had the opportunity to familiarize myself with a nice reflection on the 1962 Russian tour by familiarizing myself with one of the great jazz bassists websites. His name is Mr. Bill Crow. He was, of course, he's a legendary jazz bassist by now. He was on the tour, the original tour in 1962 of the Soviet Union, and he shares his experience of the tour with Benny Goodman, his experience with Benny, working for Benny during that tour, also on his website. And it's worth reading. I mean, when you read that, you get a whole different perspective on Benny, of course. He was a very faulted human being in many respects, like we all are. And after reading that review, to be honest, you get the impression that Benny could be quite a bit of an asshole. There's no other way of putting it. I'm sorry. I don't want to offend any fans out there. I'm a Benny Goodman fan myself, but I don't put the man on a pedestal. I don't put him on Mr. Perfect because I love his music and I love his clarinet playing. I do not forget the fact that he remains a human being, and like we all are, including myself, I include myself in this, we all are faulted to different degrees. We all have our faults and our ways of behaving sometimes that are not always pristine, they're not always the best behavior, and Benny had these faults, and Mr. Crow shares those things with us without any filters. He tells it like it is, pretty much, you know, and either you can take it or you can't take it, but I think it's an honest testimony, and I thank Mr. Crow for sharing that because it gives insight in the less pleasant side maybe of the man, but nevertheless it's a side that was there. And a lot of the musicians that worked with him talked about Benny's, how it was hard to deal with him on some occasion, and some of his idiosyncrasies and some of his behavior that was really, really not the best. Let's just say not the behavior you'd expect of a great jazz legend like him, a great jazz star. But of course, he was imperfect like we all are, and I look at that and I shrug my shoulders and I says, well, this just goes to show he was a human being, He had his feelings, and like we all have. So anyway, but that's interesting, and I really was interested in salutations to Mr. Crow, if ever in the pure chance that he watched this humble video. Well, my salutations to you, dear sir, and thank you for sharing that with us. He does share that on his website. He also has, Mr. Crow shares about the 1962 tour with Benny Goodman on a video available on YouTube. So if you do a search for that, you'll find it easily on YouTube. You can watch that. And there's also an excellent documentary about Mr. Crow himself, the jazz bassist Bill Crow, called Jazz Journeyman. If you search for that on YouTube, you'll be able to watch that documentary. Very interesting documentary. I just watched the beginning of it the other day. I'm going to watch the rest of it later, but I highly recommend it. Because these guys that are still around that played with all these great legendary musicians that we admire, well, they're our direct link. They're the living encyclopedias that we can go to and listen to what they have to recount. They're a direct connection with the music and the artists themselves and the concert and the events that they performed at. So I think it's very important to go and listen to these things, and it's always enriching. We always learn a lot of stuff and learn to know more about the people behind the music itself, and the way it was back then. So on that note, I want to go the couple of extracts I'm going to play for this last program, and I'm going to say if you like these little, again, profiles that I make where I share some of the music, some of the recorded output by some great jazz men, well, let me know by putting a thumbs up. Let me know by sending me a comment, by subscribing to the channel. I don't do this for the money. I've said it many times on many previous videos. I'm not interested in being monetized. I don't care how many views I get out there, and I'm not interested in monetization. That's why I can play some of this music without getting copyright strikes and getting my complete channel deleted, because I'm not being monetized. I'm not trying to make any money out of sharing this. So I'm sharing this from my personal jazz collection. I have an extensive jazz collection. I've been a jazz nut since I've been 14. I'm now 56. I've amassed quite a collection, and I like to share this music in the hopes that people might get turned on to it, because jazz is a music that is sadly underappreciated, sadly unknown by a large part of the population that are not familiar with it, because it doesn't play on radio, it doesn't play on television, it doesn't play on almost anywhere where you go in public places or public settings. Very little jazz is being played. Maybe in some restaurants, where you want to create an atmosphere, they'll play a little bit of jazz in the background, but generally speaking, it's a largely ignored music. So this is my little way of sharing this music and trying to turn people onto it in the hopes that you start to enjoy it. Maybe you'll want to go out there and buy some of the recordings that I share, and maybe even go and see a jazz concert, if you really start to like the music, to dig the music like I do. So anyway, on that note, the last extracts I want to play for this closing program of a jazz profile of the recorded material of Benny Goodman is going to be taken from a PBS television special that you can go and view, that's available for free on YouTube. They've got several clips of it. And this was pretty much his last live recording, I believe, to be done in 1985. So very shortly before he died, because he was going to pass away the next year in 1986, I believe in June or August, I forget the exact date. But this was probably his last live recording. He did do studio recordings in 1986, which are available on the Music Masters Yale Archives that I've spoken about on previous programs. The Yale Archives is of course, the Yale University is the university that Benny donated all his material to after his death. They took all the archive stuff, everything that was in his apartment that was music related, and in his house that was music related, and they inherited a whole bunch of tapes of previously unissued material, which they started issuing. I think they have a total of 10 volumes in a series called the Yale Music Archives, and it's all Benny Goodman recordings. And some of those recordings are the very last studio recordings that he did in 1986, so just a couple of months before he passed away. So they're on those CD sets. If you go and purchase those CDs, I highly recommend those. They're very, very interesting, and they've never been issued anywhere else before. So thanks to the Yale University Archives for that, and the people responsible for that. But I'm going to end by sharing some stuff that he did in 1985, some live recordings, as I said, from that performance live at the Marriott Marquis Hotel. This brought Benny back full circle. I mean, he was going to play here like in the olden days, in front of a dancing audience, in a great big ballroom setting, an audience that was sitting at tables that had dined before and now was at the dancing portion, and they were going to dance to the Benny Goodman Big Band, and he was going to play, of course, all those great numbers from the early days that made him popular, including maybe a couple of lesser known numbers. But he was back in his element, if I might say. And so here he is. Here's the first extract that I want to play for you. He's going to play, of course, his Let's Dance introduction, followed by, of course, one of his signature tunes, Don't Be That Way, recorded live 1985, the Marriott Marquis Hotel in New York. Here he is. Let's Dance, of course. And here comes Don't Be That Way. Benny managed to assemble, a big band of some talented musicians, great musicians. He had a knack for, getting some good people to work for him, even if often the negotiations were not always easy with the musicians about the salaries and everything. That was quite something with Benny. Again, if you go to Mr. Crow's website and read about the whole shenanigans that went on for the Soviet tour of 1962, you'll learn a little bit about this. And so he was not always an easy guy to get along with. But then again, there's some other stories, people that he was more closely friends with. That was a whole different experience with Benny. But if you were not a close friend, there was a certain distance that was created between him, that he created between him and his working musicians that work with him. And that was a distance could create quite a cold draft, let's put it that way, between him and the people. That was just the way he was, unfortunately. So it wasn't always fun for the musicians working for him. But here in 1985, Benny's coming back for full circle, as I said, to the early days, and he's got a huge smile on his face. If you go and watch these extracts, they're on YouTube. You can find them. He's very much, I think, happy because this is bringing him back to his early days. So there he is, at the Marriott Marquis Hotel in 1985. So just a few months, I guess a couple of months before, because in the following year he would be gone. And he wasn't a big band setting, but he did do a little bit of small group recordings also. Here he is playing Memories of You, another of his signature tunes from the early days. So Benny was in his 75th year by the time he was recording this PBS television special in 1985 at the Marriott, live at the Marriott Marquis Hotel in New York. And he still could play beautifully, the trumpet, the clarinet, sorry, the clarinet. And I wrote a little question to Mr. Crow again after reading that whole very highly critical essay about Benny and his attitude during the tour, which is justified, I must say, when you read about his bizarre behavior. I wrote to him, I said, Mr. Crow, could you say anything positive about Mr. Goodman after criticizing him that way? And he wrote back saying, well, he sure could play the clarinet, the hell out of that clarinet, or something like that. So I thought that was pretty good. That was a good response, because that's why we like to listen to him, of course. It's because of his great skill on the clarinet and his clarinet playing. Here he is now playing You Brought a New Kind of Love to Me. Again, one of my favorite big band era tunes. Here he is. will have been the last program highlighting some of the recorded output throughout his whole career, all the way to the end, of the great legendary Benny Goodman on clarinet. And so I'm going to leave you with that note. I'm going to leave you with one last extract from that live performance recorded in 1985 for a PBS television special at the Marriott Marquis Hotel in New York. I'm going to leave you with a song called Anything for You, which is from the late great Fletcher Henderson, also another legendary man from the big band jazz era. And Benny's going to sort of pay a small tribute to him vocally. I'm going to let that play, and you're going to hear him speak about Fletcher Henderson before playing that track. Again, if you want to share some comments, you have some suggestions about the next jazz profile, the next person I should profile. You know, the only reason I could do these things is I'm not being monetized. I'm not making money out of these videos on YouTube. I'm just sharing the music out there. I have an extensive jazz collection because I went nuts about jazz when I was 14 years old. I'm now 56 years old. And so I've amassed a huge jazz collection, got a lot of recordings by a lot of jazz musicians that I can play to share this music, to try to turn people on to this great, underappreciated, very, very, very much underappreciated music that very few people are exposed to nowadays. And this is my way of contributing to a little bit of exposure to this great music. So I'm going to leave you on the words that I always leave you before this next track plays by Benny, who is going to play a small vocal tribute there to the great Fletcher Henderson. Before that starts to play, I'm going to just pause it here. Wait a minute. And before that plays, I want to leave you with the same words I always leave you at the end of these little videos. People, remember to listen to some good jazz music and brighten up your day. It will brighten up your day and make you put a smile on your face. At least it does on me. And jazz on, people. Always remember, jazz on. So here's Benny Goodman speaking a little vocal tribute to the late, great Fletcher Henderson and playing this track by him. Here he is. I'm going to leave you on those words and on that note.
Among the many things I wanted to do in my musical career, I think one of the first ones in line was to be able to arrange and orchestrate like Fletcher Henderson. Now, Fletcher, if you don't know about him, was one of the great orchestras of the 20s and the early 30s. And the fascination with his arrangements was endless. What I mean is, you heard it the first time, and you hear it again, and you'd always hear something different. And that's why I really thought he was a genius. And that's the reason I'm really dedicating this program to Fletcher Henderson.
That's it. So until next time, my salutations from Gatineau, Quebec, Canada. Bye-bye, folks.